Hi there, I'm Kingsley and welcome to this presentation on developing a digital strategy. What we're going to hopefully cover is some of the thought process about how we create that digital strategy, the planning, the process, the documentation, and along the way I hope I'll be able to share some top tips and some advice as part of that process. Thanks for joining the session and I hope you find it interesting. So let's dive right in. What do we mean when we're talking digital strategy? Often the conversation is about that balance between what is possible versus the really important thing, which is what do we really need? And so it's really about that narrative around how we build a school for a digital world. I'm a bit of a fan of my music, so along the way you might find a few musical references as we cover this topic. And so for some, building a digital strategy, a digital vision is a bit of a long and winding road, as the Beatles would say. So what does a digital strategy mean to you? And it seems a simple question in many regards, but when I visit different schools, districts around the world and ask that question, often the response is quite mixed. Here's a few of the findings that we've picked up from recent activities and events. So you can see as part of the process, we pick up lots of those keywords we hope to see from many when we're talking about the use of educational technology in terms of it being innovative and exciting, but at the same time we also get messaging along the lines of daunting and confusing. And in many ways that's not a surprise. When we think about the opportunity to use technology, often it's heavily aligned with people's confidence and their experiences for good and bad. And within the education space, of course, reflective practice is key. So for many, if we don't have that reference point, that litmus test of how technology is being used effectively and with impact in the classroom, it's only natural when we start talking about implementing change and delivering something new that there will be concerns, perhaps sometimes linked more around capacity and experience than about the opportunity that it might present. So let's move on our little summary. I always argue that sometimes you have to look backwards before you can move forwards. And moreover than not, that really is key when it starts to think about how we might build and develop a digital strategy or a digital vision. Schools really need to be ready for that digital world. And what's really worked well for many schools and districts is how they've reviewed what they already have, whether it's become sustained and whether it's become embedded. In truth, if we're actually thinking about acquiring or delivering new technology within our teaching and learning, it doesn't really take much of a leap to identify that if we can look and see what we've already got, how it's been implemented, and those strands that have proven to be effective, we can use that as a building block for confidence and understanding. At the same time, as part of that looking back to move forward, it's about knowing where our collective skills lie as practitioners. So if we undertake regular surveys, we'll identify who has confidence using the tools that are built within the school and those where we need to provide the right professional development and support to ensure we can move that journey forward with everybody. And it's also important to know what is relevant to help support. So sometimes that school development plan links in heavily with the digital vision of recognizing where those key strands are. So if we start with knowing what's worked best already, we can look to build on that. I always say the kind of key one for me is really about getting that starting point of getting a grip on what we've already got. And some of the questions we really need to focus on around that is, what have we got already? What IT devices do we have? Where are they? Do we know if they're effectively implemented and used on a regular basis? What software applications for teaching and learning do we have? But more importantly, which ones do we use versus simply have a renewing subscription on? And also in terms of capacity, what about our infrastructure? Let's make sure we don't build on sandy land. So do we have a good understanding that our infrastructure will have the capacity not only to leverage the most out of what we've got, but if we choose to add more of something or add something new to the mix? Ironically, the more we know what we have and what perhaps isn't being used effectively, the more potentially we have an opportunity to save costs in the short term and provide that flexibility if we want to add more in the future. Nonetheless, I always say when we're talking about a digital strategy and vision, rather than the narrative being, hey, there's this or that or something else that's available, we should be using it in our school. We should really start with that consultative process of understanding what each of the stakeholders need and why. So within that mix, I always like to share this kind of Venn diagram. And really it kind of focuses around all of those key strands of building together that digital voice and vision. At the heart, not surprisingly, we have our teachers and students wanting to make sure we understand what the opportunities are, where the challenges are that sit within the classroom, how different approaches to delivering content and information will engage and empower students more in their learning journeys, how technology might help when it comes to assessment and feedback for our teachers, where the data can be used more effectively. And of course, alongside that, we also want to make sure there may be opportunities for efficiency that will reduce pressure and time on teachers. And all those are kind of core at the heart of that initial discussion. Now, of course, taking the collegiate view of making sure that everybody's involved in the discussion, we also need to make sure that the senior leadership of our school or district are feeding into that digital vision by focusing on the priorities, the areas for development, the key strands and strategies that they want to focus on. The network manager and IT admin team should be part of the conversation, so that if we're talking about change or adopting new technology, it's not a surprise to them at the last minute, and also to provide them with an opportunity to feedback where there may be infrastructure changes that are needed or barriers that we need to address first before we can deliver anything new. Really important lessons we've learned over the last 18 months is about the importance for data privacy. Something I've talked about on a number of occasions is, a real strength of the last 18 months is that educators have been empowered to take risks. And by take risks, I mean take risks by trying new technology, trying new solutions that they can use to help foster teaching and learning more effectively, and where possible to mitigate some of the distance challenges that we've had in the last 18 months. But with our enthusiasm for all the right reasons to look at new online solutions, we always need to be mindful of what data are we capturing about our learners, where's it stored, how long is it stored for, who has access to it, and so on. So data privacy needs to be part of that conversation as we build our vision. Alongside that, and I apologise, that's a UK abbreviation, special educational needs and disabilities, we also need to be mindful of that accessibility and equality in the tools that we choose, making sure that it's suitable and appropriate where possible for all of our learning cohort. We then need to think about safeguarding. I refer to our safeguarding leads as the designated safeguarding leads here in the UK, but around the world we have those that are tasked with providing that feedback, so that the more we provide accessibility to devices and to online learning platforms, we're also thinking of our responsibilities alongside CEPA and online safety to keep our children safe. And of course, that will also feed into our ambitions and strategies around digital citizenship. In any organisation, we'll have our overarching governance, those people who are looking from a broadest level at the strategic plans of where money is being spent, how we're delivering and supporting improving student outcomes. And as part of that narrative, we would expect those questions to be, why are we doing this? What are we going to actually be doing? And just as importantly, how are we going to measure the impact of that? And then you'll see there's my bubble for finance. And I kind of come to it intentionally quite late in the conversation, because actually in reality, finance shouldn't be the thing that drives the conversation, which sometimes is the case. We have some money available, we have a budget, what do we want to spend it on? For me, that's the wrong way around. We decide on our digital vision, our digital strategy, and finance should simply dictate the speed of the journey, not what the journey is. And then last but absolutely not least, because it sits at the heart of all we've learned over the last 18 months, the effective adoption of technology and new solutions is fundamentally linked to the time and resource we set aside for support and professional development for our teachers and, where appropriate, for our learners. And the more we can recognise that the most significant reason why technology fails is because of the lack of training and insight, the more effective we are in likely delivering a successful strategic plan. So we've got all our stakeholders together, we've brought those voices together, recognising the challenges we've got, where the opportunities lie, hopefully bringing into that the voices of others who've got experiences using technology in effective ways in other schools, that they're bringing those ideas and best practice to the table. And then as a collective, we need to make sure that we're also thinking about our priorities over our conveniences. And when we think about that, it's really making sure that where we look at technology, we're looking at things that are pedagogy focused. We're making sure that the things that we prioritize to tackle first are aligned with our broader school strategic plans. We're being realistic with our capacity of what's doable in a realistic timescale. We're also thinking about what we choose to do, making sure we've got ways where best to make it sustainable, and always making sure we're looking at ways that we can actually measure the impact. And this is an important one to pause on, because when we think of impact, typically in schools, we're thinking of, well, the singular measure of the qualifications and outcomes that our children achieve at the end of their learning journey. And that's a pretty good measure in one regard. But when we think about the effective use of technology in schools now, we're also thinking about how it can have a positive impact on well-being by providing that right connectivity and structure for some of our learners. We're thinking about how it can impact teachers' well-being by the time savings that can be delivered, or the facilitator to share communication and collaboration with their peers. We're thinking of the way that it can offer operational efficiency more quickly. Maybe within the learning environment, it's about how we can provide better opportunities for quick feedback. Not all the things that we deliver will have immediate measurable outcomes on student progress and attainment, but that doesn't mean it's still not measurable or that there's a real positive impact to the broader measure of our school's success. So again, thinking in that broadest possible sense of what we deem to be both our priorities and our measures. I've touched on it before and referenced it within our professional development expectations and obligations, but I can't stress enough the importance of recognizing when it comes to the use of educational technology in schools, confidence is king. Great CPD being available not just at the start of the academic term, but on a regular basis that's accessible to all. Core CPD for the curriculum apps we use, making sure that when we're looking at apps that are pedagogy focused, we should also incorporate where possible the IT support team so they understand how the tool is being used and its importance and relevance. Identifying the flag bearers, those teachers within the school who have confidence and experience with different products that can become the go-to people so teachers have other pathways to get support and advice. The more we can structure and build confidence within the teaching cohort, the more likely we are to have successful adoption. And I always love sharing this little graphic. Sylvia Duckworth's a fan of mine. I'm a fan of hers. I doubt she's a fan of mine, but nonetheless, I'm a real fan of Sylvia Duckworth. She does some great sketcher works and artwork that really set out some of these key messages. And in this case here, looking at that journey from survival mode to ultimately having mastery, impact, and then innovation when it comes to teacher confidence, I think is absolutely key. And many a school around the world have invested heavily in new deliveries of Chromebooks or iPads, and within weeks they become less and less a regular feature of the teaching and learning experience because staff don't have the confidence that when they open the lids, the students sign in, that the experience will be smooth and seamless. And unless you have confidence, naturally you will always fall back to your default position. So recognizing and understanding that is absolutely key. The other thing we've absolutely learned over the last 18 months, more than ever, and I think in many ways we have to look for the positives, the learning opportunities we've had the last 18 months. And we've recognized with the greater use of technology, whether we've gone for our Google Classroom or our Office 365 implementations, what we've identified is that we've had opportunities to improve communication in lots of different ways across our schools and district. And communication is absolutely key. So it's identified that we can improve communication internally between leadership and staff. Maybe that means, and again, I try and be device agnostic, but as an example, greater teams messaging and collaboration between leadership and staff, between staff to staff outside of their silos. Many staff I met explained how, pre-pandemic, they would typically be into their particular area of the school, get their coffee in the morning, into teaching and learning, and rarely saw staff from other departments. with the implementation of something like Teams, they've suddenly had that opportunity to share content and resources with people outside of their geographical orbit, and actually it's facilitated both professional and personal channels for greater support and interaction. But we've also seen huge improvements with the way that we communicate, not just that between the staff, but also between the staff and the students. And most importantly, I think in many ways, in extending that communication umbrella, is the communication out to parents and the broader community. And utilising those tools, whether it's in terms of simple updates on what's happening in school, whether it's about sharing resources to empower and support parents to have a greater input in their child's learning journey and have confidence in the tools their children are using at home, whether it's been to use communication to support well-being by those regular face-to-face communications with some of our more vulnerable learners, we've seen that tech has a really important part to play in that broader package. And again, I think we need to make sure that communication is built as a key strand, one of the pillars I'll talk about later, within our digital strategy and vision. I like to pop this up and say EdTech is not the solution. And some people will say, if they know me, Al, but you're a real advocate of EdTech, so that seems a bit of a contradiction. But I like to kind of say, but that's not the end of the sentence. EdTech is not the solution, but it is a facilitator, the supporter and the empowerer of great teaching and learning. So it's really, really important to understand that it's not the solution, but used and implemented effectively, EdTech has a really key role to play in supporting teachers, pedagogy, communication, well-being and parental engagement. And that's why when we think about them in a combined sense, we recognise the opportunity that's presented to us. So before we get into the nitty-gritty, what do schools say when we talk about a vision for a school for a digital world? Well, often the kind of condensed summary would be, it's built around pedagogy, experience and outcomes come first. EdTech is not the daily discussion, but is simply an integral part of the school day. EdTech is used where appropriate, but it's absolutely not forced to each and every setting. And that's really key. Some of the best classes and lessons I've seen involve no technology at all. Equally, some of the most inspiring lessons have had all sorts of technology interwoven into the learning experience. As part of our vision for a school for a digital world, it would be teachers having confidence to use the tools, teachers having the confidence to try new tools, middle leaders being empowered to innovate with technology. IT managers are at the heart of the digital discussions, not simply informed of the outcomes. Students are taught and encouraged to be confident digital citizens. Appropriate safeguarding and online safety is at the heart of decisions that we take. And in parallel to that, we're always looking at ways to take steps to mitigate the broader digital divide. Taking risks where appropriate is something that I very much encourage, and it's certainly a key indicator when we look at the most successful digital strategies, is where that's supported. It encourages, frankly, innovation. If you don't try new things, if you don't take risks, then you stifle innovation. And most importantly, digital plans and strategies for schools are not built around the concept of one size fits all. There are different devices and different applications that have different strengths and suitability based on the cohort, the age group, the subjects being taught and the setting. And we need to really, really build and recognise as part of our strategy that actually every school and every cohort is different. So we shouldn't simply replicate what other schools have done. We should ask the same questions they did and see what answers we come up with for our own digital strategy. An important quote by Bananarama, some friend of mine, Mark Anderson, often uses, it ain't what you do, it's the way that you do it. And really it's that obvious part of, it's not fundamentally about what you implement, but it's much more about how you use it and how you use it effectively. And one thing that I'm sure won't be news or some surprise to any of you is the SAMR model. And I often reference the SAMR model simply in the sense that it's not a race to redefinition. This isn't a summary that says everybody has to go to the nth degree. This is just looking and identifying areas where technology can supplement or augment the way that you do your teaching and learning already. And so reflecting on the SAMR model and recognizing that we can simply swap paper atlas with Google Earth or Google Maps is a straight substitution, but the way we can augment and add extra content and drill down and find out more helps us augment it further. When we start thinking of not just in the classroom, let's think of SAMA in the broadest digital sense for our school district. Organising parent conferences and doing them online rather than in person. We're really augmenting and modifying the way that we typically would engage with our parents. We're providing a format that's proven to be really successful, engaging some of our harder to reach families. We've got better time management, which is better from a teaching well-being point of view. We've got parents in many cases feeling more open and confident to talk about their child when they're not sat in a large open space with other parents overhearing. And so we can think about the SAMA model, not just in terms of pedagogy, but in every discussion and consideration we have when it comes to the effective use of technology. I include this in my presentations probably as much as anything else now that we're well on our journey and through the pandemic, just to kind of highlight the conversations that have happened between asynchronous and synchronous as part of our blended learning offer. And the reason I include it partly is because it becomes part of the slide deck. But I think what it also recognises is when we first flipped back in March 2020 and we were thinking about how do we deliver an online offer, many tried to replicate the school day in a purely synchronous sense. And then we recognised that simply wasn't practical, both for teachers, but absolutely for learners to sit and consume for that duration in a purely live setting. And then we recognised that there were benefits to asynchronous and providing pre-recorded exemplars and allowing our students to work offline and then feed back in. And of course, what we ended up with was recognition that it needs to be blended. There's arguments and there's validity for both at different times. And again, it's very much linked to the cohort, the subject being taught at the time. The one message I do try and build into anybody looking from a digital strategy perspective is that sometimes less is more, of course, unless it's chocolate. And by that, what I mean is this isn't a race to which school, which district uses the most technology or has the broadest breadth of applications. It absolutely is about doing small changes that you can embed, make sure they're embedded for the long term, that staff can build up their confidence and skills to be effective in their use, and that you've got appropriate ways of measuring the impact. By doing less well, you build confidence. With confidence, you feel more inclined to take the next step and the next step along your digital strategy journey. So actually that's a more effective approach than building a list of 50 things you want to do and trying to set yourself unrealistic timelines in achieving all of them, because you're probably setting yourself up for failure. And again, I apologize for many of you. This won't be newsworthy. It will be something that you've already reflected on. What we've also seen, and I think is really, really key, is as we've now moved and learnt the lessons of the last 18 months in the pandemic, what we've identified as a key measure in this process has been the need to, when we select solutions, whether it's hardware, whether it's software, whether it's best practice, is to now provide more of an evidence-based approach to implementing technology. And of course, there's all different types of evidence that we can draw on. That anecdotal evidence, where it's impressions from users' experience and feedback. The descriptive evidence, whether it's a measure of outcome over time. Correlational, where we've got this comparison between a class using a tool and a class that's not. All that kind of broader causal evidence in terms of measuring its effectiveness. The key is we don't want to buy technology of any kind based, as Adele says, on simply rumour has it. We want to build beyond that. And a great example is to follow a rubric, much like this one, which I have taken, adapted slightly from Pickerington School Districts in Ohio, Brian Seymour, somebody you may well have come across presenting at ISTE. But this kind of rubric for how do we go about selecting the right kind of software. And in truth, the key is we've got those two strands at the top. We've got our curriculum and we've got our technology strand. So let's think about it. From a technology perspective, does the item effectively work with our current and future devices? Compatibility, if we're buying technology, will it work? Maybe we're buying some software. Does it work across all the different platforms? Is it device agnostic? If it's fixed to one particular platform, will that limit our choices in the future when we want to incorporate different types of technology into the broader school learning journey? Does it work with our current infrastructure? Is this going to require an upgrade of our Wi-Fi or our cloud storage in order to support the technology we're looking at adopting? If it's a software technology, cloud-based, does the item agree with the school's data privacy policy? So how much information is it going to be storing about our students? Where does it store it? Who has access to it? Do we have confidence in the security? Do we know what its data retention policies are? And then alongside that, from that ease of use and avoiding duplication of data, can the item be rostered by, whether it's Clever, ClassLink, School Data Sync, whatever it may be, to pull in that student information, keep it up to date and pre-populate it. Those are kind of the key measures. But then we can flip to the curriculum strand. So we start thinking about, does the item align with our curriculum? So if it's pedagogy content and it's focused, does it dovetail with the curriculum that we're currently delivering? We need to make sure we, if appropriate, fill out a content questionnaire. Maybe we've got a validation process already in our school. Seems an obvious one, but is there not currently an approved program that does the same thing? So is this going to be overlapping or duplicating something we already do, or something we've already evaluated and are considering? And do we have, where appropriate, an understanding of the instructional purpose of this item? What's its intention? What we're hoping it will deliver? And possibly, again, how are we going to measure that? We can then pull those together. So we've validated it from a technology point of view, and we've validated it from a curriculum perspective. We can then pull it into that second bottom part of the process. Have we reviewed and vetted the solution at this point? Maybe we've got a committee of educators that agree within the district. Maybe we don't have that step, but then the next step will be, has the vendor done a presentation to the appropriate members of staff? Have we seen it first? This is part of our let's not waste time evaluating it till we've got a sense of what it's all about and we can make sure it does the things we really need. Have some of the teachers tested the item out in the classroom, making sure absolutely that we've got an agreed free trial period so we can try the product out either across our cohort or to do a compare and contrast between cohorts, and making sure that that pilot, the feedback from the teachers involved in that process was that it was beneficial and had a positive impact. It did what it said on the tin and hopefully more. And if it ticks all those boxes, then it moves into the, well, let's make a recommendation for it to be acquired for the school or district. And that's a very simple rubric that schools will adapt and adjust based on their own policies and their own priorities. But it's a really key strand and message now as we start to think about, research-informed, evidence-informed solutions. And that can also be built around the idea of case studies, references from other schools who have already utilised the technology. Anything that adds credibility and gives you that reassurance the solution is going to really meet your needs. Another good example, kind of moving in that journey at the moment, is the approach of actually identifying solutions that have got that independent certification. So I use an example here from one of the products in the NetSport portfolio, Classroom.Cloud, independently assessed by Education Alliance Finland. They have a framework where educators take products from vendors, utilize it within their schools and classrooms, measure and assess it against their learning frameworks. The education framework in Finland is very well respected, and then the product is rated and scored based on its pedagogical approach and its learning goals. And again, it's another piece of validation as part of that evidence-informed approach to technology. Of course, there are others alongside Education Alliance who provide similar kinds of feedback and resources. When we pull that kind of what have we learned, all those different things to consider into the next steps, how do we take one step beyond with our digital strategy? The simple answer is we try and build some pillars. And they may be these, they may be different ones for you. Within my own multi-academy trust, school district in the UK, we built around these 6 pillars. 1, focusing on innovating learning, 1 on students' digital skills, 1, not surprisingly, on teachers' skills, 1 on that broader technology and infrastructure, 1 about enhancing and fostering effective communication, and last but absolutely not least, 1 about how technology can impact on everybody's well-being. Now, part of the benefit of having pillars is that we also provide the opportunity to have different stakeholders, different staff responsible for different strands. So this doesn't become a person or a small group's project, but we can bring lots of voices into the narrative. And when we take it from there, we start thinking, innovating learning. Well, naturally, we want to be able to review the current use of technology across our district. We want to select appropriate tech that's relevant to our cohort and the subjects. We want to review that typical kind of SWOT analysis, the strengths and the weaknesses of different devices to make sure we're looking at which ones will foster and empower that innovation in our learning. We want to review the use of supporting apps so we can think of our children who are vulnerable or special educational needs, so we can think of that accessibility and inclusivity. We want to think about, will the technology foster that blend between the kind of synchronous, asynchronous recording and streaming of content? And we want to have clarity on what we mean by things like remote teaching and learning, but the broader topic of how do we innovate. The next kind of conversations we see in many schools is the use in different subjects of augmented reality and virtual reality. And as we move into this new narrative of the metaverse, we're thinking about, and it will overlap on different pillars, the use of AI, particularly to support personalized learning alongside our core teaching and learning. So understanding what we're trying to achieve and what opportunities exist for us to innovate learning. The second strand is fostering and developing our students' digital skills. And not surprisingly, that starts with undertaking a student digital skills survey once and then repeating over time so that we can identify where the strengths and where the gaps are in terms of our students' confidence in their digital skills. Often wrongly, we assume our children are skilled digital natives, but confidence with using technology at home doesn't mean they have confidence using the technology that we've selected in school, particularly the specific apps we might use to capture and assess their learning journeys. So undertaking those digital skills surveys are key. Developing students' digital skills and confidence is really part of that. Building CPD on the core tools that we use to make sure that our learners have that confidence. And let's take it a step beyond. Where appropriate, particularly for our younger learners, there's resources to support parents having confidence, to support them in that. One of the biggest strands that I'm very passionate about is building into this strand digital citizenship. The tools and the understanding for our learners to make the right choices and understand how to challenge and question information they access, as well, of course, as keeping them safe online and thinking about their own digital footprints. And alongside that, under our students' digital skills, ensuring where possible, accessibility for all. Teachers' skills, well, again, no surprise from Al on this one. It starts with staff having digital skills surveys, an open state of the nation. Where are we at? Who has confidence? Who doesn't? Sometimes people don't like to admit they're lacking in confidence. They feel there's a judgment associated with it, which of course hinders the process of saying, let's have an open and frank, where do we need support? Let's build our professional development shaped around that feedback, and let's have lots of regular feedback and support as part of our PD throughout the term, not just at a single point. Where possible, try and consolidate that across all schools within the district so we can share where there's commonality, share access to the same training and resources, as well as sharing the accessibility of those leaders that have confidence to be accessible for all. Maybe things like establishing online tech clubs, again, connecting those flag bearers, the staff that have most confidence, providing a way for them to share best practice and resources. We've all learned the benefit of recording short exemplars for our students. Well, short exemplars recorded for our peers and staff within a school potentially have just as much value. So developing and building those online resources, looking and reviewing our classroom AV, front of class. Should it be an interactive whiteboard or should it be an LCD TV? What are we trying to do? How are we trying to engage with our learners? And a kind of review of the strategy of classroom and the technology we put in the hands of our teachers, as well as our students. A really great example. My multi-academy trust, my school district here in the UK, we took a decision some years ago from a cost perspective to replace laptops with desktops front of class. That made sure that if a member of staff was off and we had a cover teacher in, there was still technology front of class to power the interactive screens. Roll the clock forward, pandemic arrives, and suddenly all of our staff don't have a good quality laptop or tablet provided by the school in their hands to use when they're delivering teaching and learning remotely or on the go. And actually, when we reflect back, if you have your own device that you can carry with you, you also have more confidence it will act as you hope when you start the lesson. So reflecting on the strategic decisions about what technology staff are given and have confidence with builds around that. Next up, technology and infrastructure. I talked about the Wi-Fi consideration. We don't want to agree on a great new delivery of tablets that we've decided are the way to go for our learners, and then find that we didn't allocate budget to upgrade the access points across our school or district, or our connectivity means that this new cloud-based application isn't going to perform as expected. So really thinking and connecting the dots with, let's make sure we've got a clear vision of what we're trying to build and our infrastructure that we're going to have in our school or district is key. Some districts have gone very much cloud as their core model. Some have taken a more nuanced approach and recognized that some solutions don't need to be cloud-based and can be operated on a local level just as effectively. Again, there will be different arguments for both. What we also want to build around that is thinking about data protection. I always argue with any new tool, you should be undertaking a data protection impact assessment. A simple question, as I've covered earlier in this presentation, about what personal information is stored by the solution that you're choosing, who has access to it, where's it stored, and how long will it be stored there. And alongside that, forming that risk assessment of what are the implications if that data is compromised, if that is shared. And then you can make slightly more informed decisions about whether you're confident and comfortable with the tools that you choose. And alongside that, for many schools and districts, you've also got to build in thinking about a disaster recovery plan. What if? Where's our backup for our data? What happens if certain systems aren't operational? Do we have a plan B? And thinking those through makes sure we make the broadest possible decisions as we move forward. I talked about effective communication and how actually we've got some really good wins over the last 18 months in terms of developing and fostering communication, particularly school to home and community, but actually within school, those channels that provide for, as I'd refer to, non-siloed communication across the teaching cohort have really helped promote effective communication and sharing of best practice. What we don't want to do post-pandemic, we keep our fingers crossed, is allow those skills and those platforms to cease to have the same role and opportunity for development as they did during the pandemic. So understanding how we can build on what we've already got in place as infrastructure now and how that can scale for sharing knowledge in the future is another really, really important strand. And then last but not least is thinking about well-being. You know, the right tools, the things we've implemented in many school districts help foster staff communication. We want to look and review tools that might help support and reduce teacher workload, whether that's assessment tracking, auto grading, easier feedback, capturing and providing audio notes rather than written notes. There's lots of different options we could think about. Reflect on if we end up doing more of our blended learning, both home and within school, thinking of the impact and balance on well-being that has, thinking about the tools we've got in place and how they can support our more vulnerable learners, their well-being, the face-to-face interaction, the regular online communications, how we can signpost and provide easier access to more of our online resources, thinking for well-being about how our technology, maybe our digital signage and messaging can be further used to develop and promote success and support, showcasing amazing work our students are doing around school on the signage, thinking of different ways to promote positivity and indirectly well-being, and then utilizing technology to create virtual well-being groups, again, providing feedback and supporting that longer journey. I have alluded to it. The best way to embed is to have your go-to people available for staff. That's the way that other staff will have confidence to try new things. So developing champions, those go-to people, the flag bearers in your school, and identifying where they are. For each solution you have, who are the go-to people? Helps support staff and allows them to take those risks, try things, knowing that if they get a problem, there's other people to go to, or within your technology ecosystem, you've got loads of learning resources or support to allow them to develop their skills quickly and effectively. If you pull those together, some of those key headline top tips are: get everybody involved at the start as you build that digital strategy and vision. Don't try and do too much too quickly. Plan for lots of continuous professional development. That's absolutely key to the thing. Building confidence is the foundation for a successful ongoing strategy. Identify ways to measure impact, but don't get wrapped up purely in academic outcomes because the timeline won't give you that information. Think of other relevant measures for your school or district where you can identify impact. Make sure that communication is the key. Build the communication around what we're doing, why we're doing this as part of our digital vision, what we're hoping to achieve by it, so that everybody's on board as part of that journey and recognizes the benefits of it. Those are my kind of top tips to start you off. I shared at the beginning, I'm Al. I have, as I always explain to many people, I have two hats. On one half, I am the group CEO of NetSport, who, as you can see on the screen here, provide a range of solutions to support schools and districts in delivering effective use of technology, from keeping our children safe to knowing what kit we've got to supporting that classroom orchestration. The other half of my time, I am chair of 2 multi-academy trusts, the equivalent of school districts here in the UK. I work with schools and support in the delivery of new schools and the effective leadership of schools. Edtech is very much my passion. For those that are interested, some of the topics I've shared here and plenty more are included in my secret Edtech diary. It's not so much of a secret now, but I shared a couple of quotes in there from the US just to give you a bit of a flavour. My passion is very much that Edtech is not for the techies. It's not something specialised. Edtech is something that everybody within the school should be involved in discussing. It shouldn't be scary or intimidating, because in truth, it isn't. It's just about using the tools and understanding the ways that we can make them the most effective and have the best impact in our schools. I hope you found this interesting. If you want to find out more, please feel free to reach out to me. I've got my social media contact details there. There's a website for myself and for Net Support at the bottom. Always happy to continue the conversation, share resources or ideas, and of course would welcome your feedback. Thanks for taking time out to listen to this presentation. It's really been a pleasure, and I hope to connect with you again soon. Thank you.